Hey everybody, Rich here, Rich's Custom Marine and Auto. Today we're working on this 2005 V6 Mustang. We're going to be doing a front end rebuild. We've got, just to see if I can show you with one hand what's going on here. Kind of hard. Anyways, it's got bad wheel bearings, which has caused the tire wear. Hard to show right now, but that's about bald on the inside. And so after doing a full checkout of the undercarriage of the front of this car, it needs ball joints and tie rod ends, and like I said, wheel bearing hubs. So gonna bring you guys along and we'll get those parts changed out. I did order everything from Rock Auto like I normally do, but here we have so these are the sway bar links, these are outer tie rod ends, inner tie rod ends, and then our lower ball joints, and I'll have all the part numbers in the description so you guys, this is actually a package deal that you can get from Rock Auto, and they send you everything you need there. So let me get that wheel off and get some tools, and I'll get you guys set up on the tripod and we'll get going. Now you'll be able to hear the bearings. Nasty. Okay, next we'll get this caliper bracket out of the way. That's 15 millimeters. All right. Now what I like to do is just put the hardware back. Of course, we'll be cleaning all of this before we ever reinstall it because it's really dirty. We'll also, you guys that have followed along, you'll see we'll wire brush all of that Loctite off of there so that it's all nice and clean, and we'll put new Loctite on it. Looking at the brake pads, they still got plenty of life left in them, so that's good. So next we'll pull these keepers off and we'll get the rotor out of the way. So when pulling these keepers, they can be a little bit of a pain. You just kind of got to work with them. Sometimes you can spin them with needle nose. Sometimes you just got to pry them off of there. You do what works for you. Alright, so the brake disc is off. I did have to spray some PB Blaster around here. You never want to pry on the surface of the disc on there. So you guys maybe can't see, but I've got these pieces of old wooden flooring that I use, and that kind of dampens and makes sure there's no damage done to the rotor. So I just put that in between the back of the rotor and this mount, and use my pry bar, and I put a little bit of pressure and then tapped on the hat portion, and it started coming right off of there, and then I turned it half a turn and did the same thing, and then it popped right off. So now we'll get this spindle nut off. That's a 1 3/8 socket. Okay, so these are a throwaway. These are a locking nut. So just make sure you have one of those when you go to put this back together. So now I'm going to go grab my slide hammer. You can either use a slide hammer across the lug nuts here, or you can put a puller. There's a spot in the center there that you that you can put your puller on there and then just press that thing off of there. So let me get that set up and then I'll bring you guys back. Okay, we're all set up there. Light's gonna fall. Okay. So that'll show you guys the inner bearing was so bad that the inner race is still on that spindle. It actually pulled it apart when it came off. So I'm going to figure out what I need to do here. I may just have to take a cutoff wheel on a Dremel and cut a slit down to where I'm almost to this, to the spindle itself, and then I can pop this with a chisel and it'll shatter it. You want to make sure when you're doing that stuff you got safety glasses on, because this hardened steel is actually kind of brittle. So you get a nice slit in that with a cutoff wheel or whatever, and you go to pop that with a chisel, it'll shatter. So just be careful when you're doing that, guys. So that's going to take me a little bit, so I'll do that off camera and then I'll show you the result at the end. Alright, we got that inner race off of there. It's still pretty darn hot, but I didn't end up cutting it. What I ended up doing was heating it. I wanted to see if I just had a propane torch, like maybe some of you guys that are working on your own car, if we could get that thing to come off of there. I do have a nice oxyacetylene torch behind me I could use if I need to, but this seal came off first. That came off pretty easy. And then I just wire brushed around here really good so I could see where the seam was, where that bearing had been pressed on. And then started heating it, spraying a little PV blaster, let it soak, heated it again, sprayed it again. And then I've got this old ratchet handle that I use that has been ground flat. And where this sits up against the spindle, I was able to get this in there and then tap it, and it started moving. And then I just went from this side and that side and then worked that thing off of there and was able to get it. So if that happens to you guys, then that's a way you can get it with a propane torch. So I went ahead and I removed the outer tie rod end. So that's an 18mm nut, and there's a few different ways that you can get this to come out of the spindle, because that thing will be pressed up in there. Of course, there's pickle forks, they call them, or whatever, ball joint, tie rod, separator tools. There's those. There's this deal, which actually works pretty awesome. That would just clamp on there. You loosen this all the way up. And this doesn't work for all of them, because like this one's got a really tall stud coming out of it, but it looks like it would work on this one. And then you tighten that bolt down and it presses it like that. It works pretty good. If you look around online, you'll see a lot of guys that'll just hit right here with a hammer. I'm not that guy. I don't like doing that. It looks like it's actually already been done because it's been mushroomed right there. But what I did was pretty easy. I just hit right there with a hammer. I'm replacing this, so I don't care if this gets mushroomed. If you weren't replacing that and you had to take it off for some reason, you could put the nut back on there and run it down some, but I would recommend if you do that, plan on replacing the nut. But I just tapped on that a few good times and then it popped out of there. So several different ways you can go about doing that. Next thing we're going to work on will be getting this ball joint out of here. Let me see if I can get the camera back there to show you guys that pinch bolt. Yeah, so we've got to take this bolt out, and then you can see right there, that's the ball joint sticking through. So we'll get that bolt broke loose and separate this a little bit, and then we should be able to push the lower control arm down out of there, and then we'll be able to work on getting that ball joint out of there. Alright guys, so here's an update where I'm at. Obviously got the spindle disengaged from the lower ball joint. That's just the boot. That thing is completely shot. I took a bolt that I had and ground it to a wedge, because back here for that pinch sleeve you can run this bolt in like this, and up in here there's just enough room to get your hammer in there and you can tap on that. What it'll do is spread that just a little bit. There is a special tool for that you can buy, and I don't have one that has two tabs and you tighten down a bolt and those tabs pull, but this works just fine. A lot of times, honestly, I just use a big screwdriver, but this one had a wider gap, so that's why I had to grind the bolt down. I did move the brake caliper. Brake caliper was down here on the lower control arm. I did move it up and zip tie it up off of the coil spring up there, just to get this brake line up out of the way and make sure that nothing got damaged there. So I wanted to show you that. So now we're at the point where I'm going to get out my ball joint press, and we'll go ahead and press this ball joint out of the control arm and get the new one in there. So let me get the ball joint press set up, and then I'll bring you guys back on while we do that. Sweet. Trust me when I tell you guys, they don't always go that easy. If you don't have one of these ball joint presses, you can go rent one at the auto parts store. Basically, you pay them the cost of the tool, just so that if you don't bring it back, they've gotten their money. And sometimes, like I've done that before, and I've decided, you know, hey, I kind of want to keep this. I want to add that to my tools. I actually did it one time, called the parts store and was like, hey, I want to keep this. And they were like, okay, it's yours. You already paid for it. So, but if you go in there, you pay the full price for it, take it home and use it, and you bring it back, they'll just open the lid, make sure that all the parts are in there, and they give you your money back. So works out pretty well. So here's our replacement ball joint, and of course it'll go up through like that. And unlike the original, this one has a snap ring groove right there. So something to share with you guys: when you go to press these ball joints in, you don't really want to press on this plate. This is the stronger portion of the ball joint right around there. The kit will come with these different size sleeves, and then this one just happens to fit that outside edge perfectly. And you've got this plate on the bottom that holds that in place. So basically you can set it up. The other side of this plate has a little raised area to fit in the tool. What I'll do sometimes to make things a little bit easier is I'll put it up in there and then I'll just lightly tap it. See if I can get it to stay like that. And then it makes it a little easier for setting my tool up. I'll get this set up and bring you guys back. Okay, so this is the setup I've got. I've got this plate pushing up against the bottom of the ball joint, and then this with the ball joint inside here. This is hollow so it can press up in there and not hit anything. And we're going to go ahead and start putting this thing in. Let's see if we're seated enough. We got just a little bit more to go here, which is fine. We'll reset up and pull it the rest of the way in. Alright, so for this specific ball joint now, we did get that pressed in place. You got to pull the boot up just a little bit and it'll expose the groove for the snap ring. Alright, so we're back going here. Got this thing going back together. I have installed the strut assembly on the ball joint. And now we're going to go ahead. They gave us a new bolt. Alright guys, so in order to get that bolt to go in, these ball joints have this groove, okay? And that's where the pinch bolt goes in that groove. Well, if you just let this just sit all on the control arm, it actually goes down too far on the ball joint. So I rigged up this, I don't know how well you can see it, but I've got this pry bar and I've got the chain back there so that I can just push down on it. And doesn't take a lot of force, but just a little bit of force, and then line it up, and then that bolt went right through. So then you just take your bar back off, and the way I've got this chain made, I just have this carabiner on the end of it so I can clip it to itself. And then it's actually pretty handy in the shop to have a chunk of chain around if you're doing this stuff yourself. And then those of you that have seen my channel before, you know that I'm a huge fan of using Loctite. So I'm going to put some Loctite on that bolt now that it's in there. Using red on this because you don't want this to come loose. Okay, we'll go ahead and torque this bolt to 76 foot-pounds. Okay, I've also changed this sway bar link. And I actually had to replace the mount up inside of there at the top, which I will do the other side and I'll show you guys, but it's this piece right here. We'll go over that on the other side, but while I had the strut out, I went ahead and replaced sway bar link. Okay, and I don't think I said, but the new pinch bolt is a 15mm head, 18mm nut, and then the sway bar nut, that's 18mm as well. Sorry for the fan noise, guys. It's getting hot in the shop. Not going to be able to show you guys, but this thing has wrench flats on the back side of it to be able to keep it from spinning. Alright, so one thing I want to point out is you'll notice I have not taken these two bolts even loose. Haven't even loosened them. If you have to pull these off for some reason, you definitely want to clean this up really good and make a match mark in through here so that you can put it back, because that changes your camber, whether you've got negative or positive, and that's how your tire sits in at the top or out at the top. And you should probably do a full alignment anyways. If you're having to replace your ball joints or your tie rod ends or both, like we're doing on this customer's car, your vehicle's just due for an alignment. So those will end up getting loosened anyways to do the alignment. But for right now, we just want to leave them where they're at and have one less thing to deal with here. Alright, so next we're going to go ahead and replace this outer tie rod end. It looks like that's probably a 13/16 or a 21mm. You can just stick this back into the knuckle real quick. That'll give us a little help holding it. Alright. Kind of a tight fit for that 13/16. But it does go. Okay? And that's why we put this back in the knuckle, is because it allows us to turn this. So now take that off of there, and take that off of there. So what you want to do here is you'll actually want to count the turns, the number of times that this is threaded on. So we'll just go 1, 20, just over 20 and a half. So that'll be our starting point for our new replacement outer tie rod. So now at this point you'd want to make sure that your inner tie rod end is good. Inner tie rod is up behind that boot, so make sure this moves, your tie rod moves nice and smooth, which it does, and then push in and out and make sure there's no clicking or play in there, which ours seems perfectly good, so we don't need to replace that. So let me grab the new tie rod end and we'll get that thing on there. So these new outer tie rod ends, they do come with a new jam nut, but I like to use the factory original one when it's still in good shape, because it's, might be hard for you guys to see, but it's twice the thickness of what they sent us. So stronger and better. And then so you guys can see on here, there's a hex on here, because if you just try and tighten down this lock nut, eventually this shaft is just going to start spinning. So you can just put a wrench on here and then you can tighten this. So alright, so we got a little over 20 and a half turns. Came off around in there, so there's half. 1. 20. Now, it's gonna be different probably, but I left the nut pretty close to the old tie rod end, and you can see there's a little bit of a gap. So, but we'll go with what we've got for now, because we can easily adjust that later. And in this case, since we're going to adjust it later, I'm going to leave this jam nut loose and just not mess with it. Alright, so my wife got these a while back for me. They're sockets and ratchet with a hole all the way through. So that's pretty cool. So that means I can just use a regular socket there. Perfect application for that. Now you guys might be wondering, I didn't put Loctite on this one, and that's because it's a nylon insert. It's a nylock nut. Okay, so at this point we can go ahead and put the grease fitting in the bottom of our tie rod in there. And I need to put the grease fittings in the sway bar link also, but I'll do that off camera, is that it's not really going to be possible to get the camera back in there to show you guys. Just make sure, guys, before you put the wheels back on, that you do go through and grease these. I've seen guys do a full front end rebuild and then forget to grease everything, and they only come shipped with a little bit of grease in them. just to keep them from corroding. So you want to make sure that you get that stuff greased up. And so the next thing we'll do with you guys is I'll take the other side apart. You guys have already seen how that works. And then once I get the strut out on the other side, I'll show you how I replace that upper mount. Okay guys, so we're ready to drop this strut out. I got everything disconnected over here. The last thing we got to do is pull these 4 nuts off. So I'm going to take 3 of them off. That way I'm ready to have my hand underneath and grab a hold of this thing, because otherwise it'll just drop out of there. Okay, and that's it. So I'll get set up on the bench and show you guys how I replace this. Alright guys, so here's our setup here. Yes, it's a busy bench, it's okay. So we've got our spring compressors set up. We'll run these down evenly. Okay. So now we're good. We're ready to take this nut off the end. Now there's an Allen in the end of this to keep that from spinning. But I've got a pair of these. These are called cannon plug pliers. For any of you that worked on military aircraft and stuff, you'll know. But they've got these really soft jaws. They won't mark that piston, so I just grab it. And it's off. So now, this kind of pops into the spring. Okay, there's our bearing piece. Now something I want to make sure you guys are aware of, right here, make sure we're focused, right here there's a mark, and on the new one, I'll show you in just a second, there's an arrow. That points to the outside of the car. So this thing, the way the car's sitting right now, sat just like that. Okay, we got our brand new strut mount. Comes with new hardware. We'll set that over here by the car. And then guys, there's the arrow I'm talking about. So we'll make sure this gets set in the car like so. Pretty simple to know. The end of the spring will go right there, of course, and this thing will kind of pop in place. And then it's a little difficult to turn, but you can turn this to make sure it's lined up before you install it in the car. Get that thing popped on just like that. Make sure the spring is in its pocket over here. Now, I found with these that the new rubber is nowhere near as compressed, of course, as the old rubber was. So what we'll do, really pretty easy, making sure our springs lined up in its pocket. But you just push down on this a little bit. And you can get this thing started. And then it's just the reverse. I'll take my super soft jawed pliers there, grab a hold of the piston. Okay. So now this would go in the car like this, so we'll spin this. Oh, that new bearing works so nice. So that it's pointing out. So I'll shut the camera off here, I'll get the coil spring compressors off of here, and then we'll get set up to get this thing back on the car. Alright, so everything's ready. We'll go ahead and get this strut up in there. Make sure we've got the arrow pointed correctly. Close enough. Okay, it's enough that I can get one started, and then that thing's hanging there. So now, you'll want to go ahead and get everything hooked up on the bottom, your ball joint and all that stuff, and then have some weight on there before you put your Loctite on and torque those. Alright guys, so the new hubs did just get here. Got them on there. Put the new nut on, torqued it to 221 foot-pounds. And then, of course I gotta put the little dust cap on, but I wanted you guys to see that. And then, once I do that, then I'll show you guys putting the brakes back on one side so you can see that and the torques that go with that. Alright, so we're ready now to put the dust shield back on, and it goes back on like so. Leaves an opening for the brake caliper. We'll put just a dab of Loctite on these. Okay, we can set our disc back on there, like that. And then we're ready for our caliper bracket, or as the OEM calls it, the caliper anchor. Alright, so I've put some blue Loctite on the anchor bolts. Now, as I said before, guys, you want to make sure you clean off all the old Loctite before you go reinstalling these and putting Loctite on them, so they should be nice and clean like that. Okay, so these get torqued to 85 foot-pounds. Okay, and since we're reusing the other pads because they looked good, we'll get those installed. We'll cut our zip tie that's holding the caliper. A little bit of blue Loctite for caliper bolts. When I cleaned all of this stuff, guys, I made sure that the slide pins still move nice and smooth, and they did. And these have a slot here. Not sure if that shows up on the camera, but this slide pin has a flat that's got to sit in there. It looks like somebody in the past has not made sure that's lined up. It kind of marred it up a little bit, but it's not going to hurt anything. Making sure that this one's lined up like it's supposed to be, which it is. Now we'll torque those to 25 foot-pounds. And then the last thing we need to do is, I may have bumped the camera there, but last thing we need to do is put the bolt back in for this brake line. And if I didn't say, the caliper bolt heads are 12 millimeter. The caliper anchor or bracket bolt heads are 15 millimeter. And then the bolt for this line is a 10 millimeter. You don't want to get that too tight, just snug. It's a self-tapping bolt. You can see it there. And then, so I will do this off camera, but I'm going to go through like I talked about earlier, and I'll grease all of these fittings, get everything all greased up, and then of course I've left these jam nuts loose. I wouldn't drive it that way, but we're going to do a shop alignment on this. And what I mean by that is you can take, put the tire on, get the other side together, put its tire on, set it on the ground, and then you want to roll the car forward and back so the suspension settles out where its normal ride height is. And then you can put a level or a 2x4 across the tire on each side, have a helper run a tape measure in front of the tire, like through here, and then see what that measurement is, and then do the same in the back. And you want to get it pretty close to exactly the same as you can, to so that you've got, you know, if it's 63 7/8 in the front, you want it to be 63 7/8 in the rear, or whatever the measurement is. You want it to be the same front and rear, as close as you can get. Now, guys, this doesn't mean you don't need a front end alignment. What that does for you is it gets it to where you can drive the car to the tire shop or to the alignment shop to have them do a proper alignment, because they're going to check, not only are they going to check what you set there as toe in and toe out, they're going to check where the top of the tire is leaned in or leaned out, which is your camber, and then they're going to check the lean angle here, which you can see that strut leans back a little bit. That's your caster, and all of those have to be in spec in order for the car to feel correct and to drive correct. So you definitely want to make sure you get that done. So hey guys, thanks for following along. Thanks if you're a new subscriber. Appreciate all the support. We got another customer rig here. We just basically got to put the tires on and do that shop alignment, and it'll be ready to go, and we'll be ready for the next customer that comes in. But thanks for watching. Thanks for the support. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.